Okay, class, welcome back. So we just got finished talking about our non-specific responses, things like just having intact skin or having white blood cells or running a fever. Just a generic response that you would have the same response to any infectious agent. In this chapter, we're going to talk about our adaptive immunity. This is more specific immune responses. So you could develop an immune response to influenza. You could develop an immune response to measles, but your immune response to influenza won't protect you against measles. Your specific response to influenza is going to be specific to protecting you from the flu, and your immune response to measles will be specific to protecting you from measles. So that's what it means by specific, that it is against one specific pathogen and not against just anything. Adaptive immunity is going to be an induced resistance, so this is not something you're born with. You develop it through either an infection, which means that your patient gets sick with it, and their body eventually learns to recognize and fight that pathogen, and they get better, hopefully, or through vaccination, which would be using something that's not as dangerous to develop an immune response. This involves T cells and B cells, and when someone has developed an immune response, they are sensitized. That means that they have been exposed to the pathogen and have started producing antibodies. Vaccination is a way to develop an immune response, an adaptive immune response, without all the harm of the natural infection. In vaccination, you'll deliberately expose people, so they will come into your clinic, and typically it'll involve an injection, although it could involve other types of vaccinations. And you're deliberately exposing them to harmless versions of the pathogens. That could be a killed version of the pathogen. It could be just a portion, like just a piece of its cell wall. It could be a toxin that's been inactivated. It could be a cell that is still living but has been weakened, so it's able to develop an immune response without causing an infection. Vaccination then will render your patient immune. I hope you remember talking about smallpox back in chapter 1. That was the first disease that was prevented with vaccination. If you don't remember talking about Edward Jenner, please go back and cover that again. So can you tell me, is vaccination an example of innate or adaptive immunity? Our specific immune response involves two different paths, our humoral immunity and our cell-mediated or cellular immunity. Humoral is called humoral because body fluids used to be called humor, and the name just stuck. So this is things that can travel through your body fluids, and it involves mainly antibodies, which are secreted by B cells. Then here we have our cell-mediated immunity. These involve mainly T cells, specifically cytotoxic T cells. And these T cells are able to contact antigens. We'll talk about that word in a minute, but antigens are things that activate your immune system. And that'll cause a T cell to secrete cytokines and kill infected cells. So to have an immune response, you need both antigen-presenting cells, which can recognize an antigen and recognize that something is pathogenic, and antibody-producing cells, which can start making the antibodies that will coat that pathogen and get rid of it. Your cellular immunity will attack antigens that have already entered cells. This would be things like viruses inside of a cell or an intercellular bacterial. And humoral immunity will fight things outside of cells. So an extracellular bacteria, a toxin floating through your bloodstream, or a virus before it's entered your host cell. So what type of cell is most associated with humoral immunity, and what type of cell is most associated with cellular immunity? One more thing in our introduction is we're going to talk about how our immune cells communicate with each other. So they're not each immune cell just going about as an island living its own life. They are going to interact with each other and communicate with each other. And they communicate with each other through cytokines. We've already briefly talked about cytokines. They are how cells interact with each other, how they communicate with each other. Some cytokines we'll talk about in this chapter. We have interleukins. So that leukin tells you leukocyte. So these are how white blood cells are going to communicate with each other. Chemokines, which are the cytokines that help those leukocytes migrate into infected tissue. So these are some we've already discussed. Interferons, we already discussed. These are cytokines that protect cells from a viral infection. We talked about interferon alpha and beta primarily. Tumor necrosis factor are cytokines that will induce inflammation and autoimmune diseases. So these are ones that we do not want running amok. We want these to be controlled to prevent inflammation and autoimmune diseases. And if cytokines, they need to be really tightly controlled, because if they're not carefully controlled, they can start overacting and just getting a little bit hyper. And so the cytokines stimulate the cells to make more cytokines and more, and it can be harmful. It can end up damaging the tissues of your own body. Here's some key cytokines. If you want to pause and read through this chart, this is helpful to you to be able to recognize when you see something like IL-4. It means it's an interleukin, although I will not be quizzing you on this chart. So now you can describe to me what is the function of cytokines. And then I will see you back in our next video. We're going to start actually talking about how our T cells are working and how they are going to recognize pathogens in our body. See you later. Bye.